Good evening, everyone. I'm Keegan Chetwin, the director of the Military Aviation Museum, and I'm pleased to be back here with everyone for another of our ongoing series of Wednesday night webinars. As always, tonight's speaker is just a tremendous bright spot in the warbird community. We do our level best to bring you interesting speakers with great things to say about their work and their research out there in the field. Tonight's speaker is Chris Henry, the Museum Programs Coordinator at the EAA Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He's actually joining us from his office, and we've got a big thank you to give to him for being here with us, but also a big thank you to the sacrifices his family is making during this coronavirus pandemic. Chris's wife is actually an RN who's on the front lines of dealing with the coronavirus outbreak there in Wisconsin. So we really appreciate him taking out some of his time away from his family and away from everything that they're dealing with in Wisconsin to present tonight's webinar. So I guess that's probably about enough from me. Chris, do we have you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah, we've got you loud and clear. Why don't you talk to us a little bit more about the incredible story of America's ace of aces? It's kind of a hometown Wisconsin story to some extent.
It is, absolutely. And first off, thank you for that warm invite, the warm comments, and thank you for having me back. I really enjoyed talking with you before about the B-17, and this is one that's near and dear to my heart. I'm literally probably about 12 feet, well, not more than 12 feet. It's probably about 25 feet away from Marge, the P-38. Our 38's painted as his aircraft. And I just, since I was a kid, I'll tell you where this interest came from was I built the monogram model P-38. And I think anybody out there who's built that model knows that it came with a little Marge sticker for the fuselage for the gun bay. And that really kind of sparked my interest as to what the story was. Why was this woman's photo on the name and her name on the airplane? But again, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate being here. And let's talk a little bit about America's Ace of Aces. Oddly enough for me, I'm used to giving this presentation again to folks who maybe aren't necessarily as aviation minded as I'm sure a lot of you are that are listening. It's amazing to me that he's not more famous than he is. If you're in the aviation community, Richard Bong certainly is achieved a level of fame. But if you go too far outside the aviation world, people don't know necessarily who that is. A great example of this is just up the road, or down the road actually. If you're coming up 41, if you're coming from like the Illinois line up to here, right when you cross that Illinois line, there is this sign on 41 northbound. And it's the Bong recreation area. And police actually have a hard time with people stealing signs because they think the name is funny. People always make jokes about it. And it's one of those things that, you really sit back and you're like, wow, you guys have to understand who this is and why that's named that. And remind me at the end of this, and we'll talk about why that recreation area is actually there. But going forward, the story of who was Bong, what is this named after? It's named after Richard Ira Bong. Richard Bong was born in September 1920 up in Poplar, Wisconsin. Now, if you're not familiar with Wisconsin, it's way up north, or up north as they say here. It's up near Superior. I once accidentally said it was Superior, and I got in trouble with a lot of native Wisconsinites. But he was born up in the Poplar area, grew up on a farm, and it was a president who had actually moved a summer camp up in that area and had a mail plane that would fly in either every day or every couple days. And it would fly over the Bong family farm. And that's where Richard Bong first kind of got inspired by aviation and decided he wanted to try to go out and fly. He learned actually both for a little bit. He had a few airplane rides and a few lessons in the Poplar area. And then he joined the United States Army Air Corps at that time. He had gone through the civilian pilot training program and basically got accepted in the United States Army Air Corps. And it was really kind of evident early on. His early instructors were saying that he was just really quiet, really humble guy, but you get him in a cockpit and he was just an amazing, skillful pilot. And here's a quote from Captain Barry Goldwater, which was his instructor out at Luke Air Force Base, and they were flying T-6s. And he described him as one of the finest natural pilots ever met. and that was from the checkout pilot who'd given him a checkout in a P-38. Now, at this time that this was going on, that he was doing this training, we were not at war yet. He actually joined in the summer of 41, and they were figuring out what type of airplane that they were going to be aiming at. There was a new airplane coming out that they were going to need pilots for, and that was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. And it was an airplane like nobody had ever seen before. Twin engine, twin boom aircraft. The pilot sat in a center a pod, if you will, and it had all the armament in the nose. And that was something else that was kind of amazing. You know, fighter planes at that time had the guns sort of spread out in the wings and give you sort of a wide swath. The P-38 had 450 caliber machine guns and a 20 millimeter cannon right in the nose, and it all converged on one point. So I mean, if you really hit that target, you were really going to hit it. They gave Bong and his squadron mates P-38s. They also gave him a commanding officer, General George Kenney, and Kenney ordered them to go out and really fly the P-38, really get comfortable with it, go out and you know, ring it out pretty good. They immediately, the pilots went out to the Golden Gate Bridge and started doing loops around the Golden Gate Bridge with their P-38s. The final straw from Kenney, which you'll see here, was that Kenney basically got a complaint from a woman who said she had just done her wash, hung her laundry out to line dry, and one of these P-38s flew down her backyard and knocked all of her laundry off the clothesline. And there was no proof of who did it, but Bong got singled out, and Kenney said, "You're going to go to this woman's house, and you're going to make good and do all her chores this day because we want to leave a good impression for her." And Bong did, without complaining, went to this woman's house, finished her laundry for her. And his exact argument, or his exact orders were, if you hang a piece of laundry and it falls on the ground, you're going to rewash this piece of laundry for her. So he chewed him out, but he actually also wrote in his memoirs that I wouldn't have wanted any pilot in my squadron that didn't do the exact same thing that Bong did with that P-38. As a matter of fact, when Kenney starts to ship out to the Southwest Pacific, he is actually able to handpick the pilots he wants to take with him to form a squadron, and Bong was among those pilots that he was going to take out there. This is where it gets a little interesting as far as squadron assignments. Bong and those the men that were selected by Kenney were supposed to be attached to the 49th Fighter Group, and the problem with that is the 49th Fighter Group was not yet ready for P-38s. They were still flying the P-40. And Kenney had a hard time assigning Bong and a few of the other ones he sort of decided were pretty good pilots to get checked out in an airplane they were going to not really fly that much because they were going to transition back into a P-38 anyway. So instead, he sent Bong to the 35th Fighter Squadron, along with a few others. The 35th was actually the first to receive P-38s, and this is actually them out in the Southwest Pacific there. Bong fell under the command of a gentleman named Thomas Lynch. Lynch was from a Pennsylvania boy, where I'm from, and he was actually a really superior pilot. He was an amazing aviator, and him and Bong would actually become close friends and fly together quite often. He had actually achieved some kills in a P-39 Airacobra as well. I mean, and that's something that, you know, especially in early days of the war, that wasn't an easy feat to get, as a lot of kills in a P-39. But he did, and eventually got into the 38s. As they started to do their fighter sweeps, there's a few airplanes that you're going to see or hear a lot of, and this is what they mainly had in force: the Zero, the Oscar, and a Val. And those were the airplanes that they were basically fighting up against for the most part. There were some others. There were Bettys in there and others, but these were the ones that, at least when you start talking about Bong, that he seemed to see a lot. His kills were mainly these types of aircraft. Their first actual victory for Bong was just after Christmas, 1943. He was out there with Lynch. As a matter of fact, they started into combat. Lynch picked up an enemy, and he went in after him, and another Japanese aircraft came in behind Lynch, and Bong saw that, slipped in behind the Japanese aircraft that was trying to trail Lynch, and shot that airplane off of his tail. He descended down to a low altitude, to what he said was the shortest tree in the Southwest Pacific, and flew over that, and he saw, I believe it was an Oscar that was climbing out, and he shot that aircraft down as well. Now, something to talk about, P-38s had a really great success rate in the Pacific. In the European theater, they struggled a little bit with the high altitude bomber escort role. In the Southwest Pacific, they were flying at altitudes not as great as the bombers in the European theater. But the other thing is the armament. You set them up for success. I mentioned earlier, 450 calibers and a cannon in that nose. Japanese airplanes, not a lot of armor in them. So it was something that these aircraft could, really make a dent. You hit a Japanese Zero with the cannon on a P-38, and you're going to put a big hole in the side of that thing. And in many cases, Bong blew tails off and things like that. So really incredible. Now, his kills are scattered throughout. We could be here all night just talking about the kills that Richard Bong had. He ended the war with 40 victories, and they're all scattered. There's not a lot that happened like right on the same day, except for July 26th. July 26th, he actually took off in a P-38G, went up and flew a mission and ended up doing a fighter sweep. By the end of this day, he shot down 4 enemy airplanes. One of his other squadron mates shot down another 2 or 3 as well. It was a pretty successful day. At the end of the day, he landed on 1 engine because the other engine had been damaged. Just an amazing feat, though. Think about shooting down 4 enemy airplanes in 1 day. And living out there, you could look in this picture. I mean, nothing looks fun. Life in the Pacific Theater of Operation was not fun at all. We actually had the chance to sit down and interview 2 veterans who flew with Richard Bong. I'll mention them here shortly, but one of the funny stories they told was that the Japanese would do harassment bombing. So he said, I can't remember what the record was. It was like over 100 different times where they would come over and drop bombs and things like that. And it was really incredible that, they would just try to break up their sleep pattern and demoralize them. And they said Bong got to a place where he just wouldn't wake up. Like, we were all supposed to, if the siren sounded or if the bombers were coming, we all ran out and we had ditches that we were supposed to jump into or foxholes. And he said that Bong just said, they can't hit anything anyway. I'm staying in bed and sleeping. And he said that was all well and good until one night they dropped a phosphorus bomb, and it lit up the sky, and it had these big, like, cloudy looking fingers that streamed down from the sky. And he said, I jumped into my foxhole and Bong jumped on top of me and fell into the foxhole on top of me. And it was comical because Bong just never got out of bed, and that night that scared him to death, and he was in the foxhole with us. But life in the Pacific was pretty tough. These guys moved around a lot. They did manage to get music and some comics. Richard Kirkland drew a lot of comics and would post them and hand them around and things like that. And they had kind of had fun with the comic strips there. But they would have music, though. They went to one base in the Pacific where they actually found a B-26 Marauder that was in the scrapyard. They managed to drag it out of the scrapyard and fix it up. They took all the guns and everything off it, and they kind of made it their hot rod. And they would use that to fly to bases and try and get alcohol and things like that for them to drink. So they said it didn't really fly straight, and it was totally illegal because this airplane was scrapped out. But it was something to boost morale and get these guys going. By the time his first tour was up, Bong had achieved 24 victories. And it wasn't long before he started to notice he was coming after 26 victories, which was Rickenbacker's record. That was America's ace of aces before this. They sent him home on leave, though. He did get to go home, spend the holidays. He went home in, I want to say it was November, and got to spend some time with his family out in Poplar. This is him actually in the Superior area, meeting some of the dock workers and things between Superior and Duluth. Of course, he arrived not by truck or by Jeep or by train. He kind of arrived in style. There he is arriving over the shipyards there, and just a neat guy. So he's in town. It's a big deal for the town. I mean, he's kind of their local war hero already. And they said, that the college that you went to, the Teachers College up here in Superior, is having a dance. Tonight is the homecoming, and they're going to name the new queen. Would you be willing to be the MC for the evening and give away the outgoing king and queen and welcome in the new one? And he said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. He was given cards little cue cards of who to read to, read their names. He got one card, and it just said, "You're gonna have to remember a lot of people tonight. You can just call me Marge." And that was the incoming queen that year for the college, and that was a woman that would be very special to him, as you'll see here shortly. But for the rest of they hit it off immediately. And this photo is actually from that evening, but they hit it off immediately. And the rest of his time while he was on leave, they were just always together. They were never separated. And, I'm sure for him, time went, too fast, but he was going to have to go back, and he agreed to write her. And that became his girl. That was his girlfriend back home. And Marge was, obviously excited by it. She thought he was a great guy and the love of her life already. He gets back to the Pacific, and they give him a brand new silver P-38J Lightning. And he actually had one of the first bare metal P-38s in the 49th. And, they said, "Here you go." And he's kind of looking around, and everybody's kind of decorating their aircraft with different nose art and, bathing suit girls and things like that. And he had named the airplane Marge. And he said, but it didn't feel right putting his girlfriend, in a risque pose. That just didn't strike Bong right. And anybody that knew Bong says, yeah, that wouldn't be him. He was a pretty humble guy about that stuff. So he wrote back to Marge, and he just asked if she could send him her most recent photo. And I love telling this story, and I love I like to tell this story when we're giving tours around the airplane as well. Because right now, today, we're all sitting here listening to this tonight. Probably we have something right in front of us or next to us that can take a picture. But back, in the 1940s, it was kind of a deal to have your portrait taken. It was something you dressed up for, and happened very little. You didn't have a lot of pictures like that. So she sent him the most recent photo she had, which was her college graduation picture. And this is that photo right there. A big thank you to the Bong family, who actually shared this original digital negative with us. So they had the negative digitized and actually shared a copy of it with us. And that's what you're seeing right here. So that's why it's very clear. If you see a lot of the decals and stuff, it's always kind of cloudy. This is the real portrait photo. Marge thought she was sending the photo to go either in his tent, his wallet, maybe on the dash of his aircraft, on the the panel. And instead, he went out and to the mapping department, had the mapping department make a big copy of it, had a couple copies made, and he glued it to the nose of his airplane. And he tacked it up there. They used some sort of sealant on it. It would weather off after a couple flights. So he actually had a couple made and would put them on there. He actually had multiple airplanes named Marge, but this is the most sort of well-known version of Marge is here. Shortly after he does this, Stars and Stripes comes out and does a story about his squadron and about Major Bong. And, they're like, well, go out and stand next to the airplane. So he goes out and stands next to the aircraft, and they shoot this photo. The photo hits the news wire and comes home to the States. And Marge suddenly finds herself as a celebrity, and people are kind of bombarding her. They want to interview her. They want to talk to her about what's it like to date America's ace and all these things. And she had no idea. She had no idea that picture was actually on the aircraft. So Dick actually wrote a letter home that simply said, "Dear Mom, I hope Marge isn't mad, but I think she looks a heck of a lot better than what these guys are painting on their airplanes." Marge was definitely not mad. She was extremely flattered. I had the extreme honor of meeting Marge. Got to spend a few moments with her here in Oshkosh back in the 90s before she passed. And, she said Dick always joked and said that I was the most shot at girl in the Southwest Pacific. So many times his airplane would come home with some bullet holes in it. So our aircraft is painted this way. This is what it resembles. One of the other things I wanted to point out is if you look, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but if you look on the nose forward to where Marge is, you'll see 597. Now, the big numbers say 99 or 933 or 993. I can't remember which right now, but that's the tail number of this P-38. But the 597 underneath it, recently kind of discovered this with the Bong folks, was that was a tail number to honor a fallen comrade. That was a tail number of his P-38, and that's why those are up there. And that brings us to Tom Lynch. Those numbers honor Lynch's aircraft he was shot down in. Him and Bong were actually flying together on March 8th. They were out strafing some Japanese shipping. They found some barges, and Bong was kind of able to bounce between squadrons. That was something that Kenny wanted him to do. Their objective was to go out there and destroy Japanese aircraft. He didn't care how they did it. He just wanted them shot down. And so he didn't really restrict some of the bigger aces. And unfortunately, while they were shooting up these ground targets, Lynch's aircraft was hit by ground fire. The aircraft engine caught fire. He was going down and tried to bail out. He popped the canopy and bailed out by around 200 feet and just didn't get a clear chance to bail out. Bong tried to provide cover, trying to find where he went down at. I don't know if they ever did. I'm sure they probably eventually did, but at the time they did not find him. Bong himself had a damaged engine on his number 1 engine and had to fly home on 1 engine again. But he had to eventually go back because he was, nursing a wounded aircraft as well. That's something that always bothered Bong, that he lost his buddy on that mission, though. That was something that, carried through with him. Basically, Kenny had announced that he wanted to break Rickenbacker's record with one of his men. And there was certainly a race of aces was on. I know there's a recent book out, actually, that I think is called that, and it's really good book if you get a chance to go out and get it. But Rickenbacker, of course, famous World War I ace, 26 victories. And in the spring, I believe it was in April 1944, he broke that record. And then thus becoming America's ace of aces. He broke the record. He had 27 kills and kept going. Now, a couple different things happened in the 49th that were interesting for a lot of different reasons. One of which is flying with this guy. Now, Richard Kirkland, so for those of you who aren't aware, that's Charles Lindbergh, gentleman who crossed the Atlantic in the Spirit of St. Louis. And we had the chance to go down to Virginia, actually. This gentleman actually lives down by you guys. Unfortunately, he's deceased now, but we went down to Virginia, I think it was Vienna area, and did an interview with him. Just an awesome guy. Flew in the squadron, and of course, again, that's him and his P-38 that he's proud of. But he said he was always a fan of Lindbergh. Who grew up in that era who couldn't say that they weren't influenced, by Charles Lindbergh and, the amazing crossing in the Spirit of St. Louis. And he said, so they called us all into a briefing one day, and they said, Lindbergh is going to come out here and he's going to teach us how to lean the aircraft back, get longer missions out of the aircraft, and get a longer range. And he said, the pilots, I was geeked out. He goes, I was so excited to meet Charles Lindbergh. And he goes, I was really blown away by the feeling that a lot of the pilots didn't have. Some of them were not excited. Some of them, questioned whether he was supporting, the Nazis and things like that. And he said, I just kind of put all that aside. I wanted to meet the guy who flew the Spirit of St. Louis. When he gets there, he does not have his own airplane and is asked to select an aircraft. After talking to the pilots, he was actually given Marge. Marge was the aircraft that was probably in the best condition because Dick was allowed to pick his own crew chief. So he had the best crew chief, he felt. And that's actually Lindbergh sitting in Marge, getting ready to go fly a mission. Now, Lindbergh was ordered to never get into enemy action. And, he said they took off. And he goes, prior to takeoff, we had a briefing out at the airplanes. And Lindbergh literally told us that, don't worry if we all get into a fight. I have special permission to get into a fight if we get into it. And he says it wasn't until weeks later that we found out that he actually did not have any special permission to get into a dogfight. He was ordered, especially to stay out of dogfights. They did not get into any action while they were there. They just did some work where Lindbergh showed them how to lean the aircraft way back. And, it was interesting. Kirkland said it was really spooky because we would lean the airplane so far back that it just got really kind of quiet. And he said, and we weren't used to hearing the 38 sort of sound like that. But he says we got longer range. They were kind of told that if you have anybody loses an engine, because everybody kind of wasn't sure if this theory was going to work. And they said, if anybody loses an engine, that's the first sign that you guys are coming back. Knock it off. Everybody come home. And nobody lost an engine. And so he said that was kind of a game changer for us. And he said, I'm not sure if I was happy or not, because that meant we were going to spend longer hours in a P-38, which is kind of famous for having a small cockpit. He said, but he did just that. He did prove to us that you could get the range out of there. Ralph Wandrey is another gentleman who flew with them in the same squadron, 49th. And Ralph actually flew Bong's P-38 on several occasions. Dick would let him fly it. And, Ralph tells a great story that they were flying a mission and Dick just kind of peels off and goes out on the horizon, and you see a flash. And then Dick came back, and what had happened was they were flying along, and he said Dick saw a Japanese reconnaissance plane and peeled off and went after him and destroyed him. And the rest of us didn't even see the thing. There's a little bit of so you gotta understand, Dick did not have a big ego. When he got into a cockpit, he was very, very skilled in a cockpit. But he didn't really buy into the hype of the Hollywood stuff. And Ralph said, so he kind of put out that, well, I'm a lousy shot. And he said, well, Ralph Wandrey said, no, he said he hit about 90% of the stuff he aimed at. So he said, no, I would disagree with the fact that he was not a good shot. This is someone who was actually a gunnery instructor for a while at Luke. So quite the opposite. There's a great squadron picture of some of the men of the 49th. As a matter of fact, I told you guys about Richard Kirkland, and if you look at the number 2 engine of that P-38 and you follow it straight up where my cursor is, you'll see the prop plate sticking up. That's Richard Kirkland right next to it. So, and of course that's Dick there. So, but just an amazing group of guys. I mean, the age of these people, you're talking about people dogfighting in their mid to 20s, sometimes maybe late 20s, but not very often. Again, the quote about him: quiet, shy on the ground, aggressive, hostile, and fearless in the air. Something to consider: a large portion of Richard Bong's kills came from head-on attacks, head-to-head combat. They were aimed right at each other. Bong found that if you aimed at the cockpit of the Japanese airplanes, that it was easier to knock them down. And that's what he would do. I mean, but a lot of times he ended up in a situation where he was flying head-to-head against guys. Couldn't imagine that, because a lot of times these were outnumbered. On several of the missions, he talked about shooting down an airplane and then trying to get away, and there's 6 or 7 more that just seem to fill the sky and come after you. So many occasions he actually came back with holes shot in his airplane, the airplane over-G'd or overstressed. One of the, I believe it was a G model P-38 he had, he did end up making a crash landing because the thing was just so shot up. He escaped, not harmed, but the P-38 was written off. So, I mean, just an amazing, fearless leader for sure. Now, I mentioned that there was a race going on. Well, there was. There was another gentleman named McGuire. He was also going after the record. They both wanted to achieve the most amount of kills they could, and they were running pretty neck and neck. McGuire was just a couple behind Bong. I mean, and I'm talking like 2. I mean, literally 2 kills behind him. And then there was a bit of a game changer. Right in December, Bong is given the Medal of Honor. And while he's given the Medal of Honor, they ground McGuire. Now, the reason is because they're going to send Richard Bong to go stateside. And they don't want to send this guy home stateside with the Medal of Honor as America's ace of aces, and then meanwhile literally have him lapped and he's no longer the ace of aces, but you have him on a war bond tour. I don't know how much that really mattered to the public. I think they would have viewed it as a war hero regardless. But, the propaganda machine, they didn't want to do that, so they grounded McGuire, which infuriated McGuire. He was not very happy with that whole situation. He was sitting at 38 kills, and Bong was sitting at 40. So Bong gets shipped home to the United States after getting the Medal of Honor, and they give him another brand new P-38. And this one is a factory fresh airplane. He again put Marge on it, a little different lettering. And then he gets to go home and meet Marge with it. And it's the first time that the woman has actually met the aircraft. And so that's her there at a photo op with the airplane. Highly illegal to take a passenger, non-military passenger up for a P-38 ride. Bong didn't really care, so he took Marge up for a ride in a P-38 named after her. In February, the two got married, and she became Marge Bong. Dick had taken a job offered to him with the Air Force, being a test pilot at Dayton, Ohio. And so he was assigned to Dayton, Ohio. They spent some time in Dayton. He actually did some work on flying a couple different P-38s and different aircraft. The P-38 that's in Udvar Hazy, not far from you guys, is one of the airplanes he flew at Wright Field. That was one of those airplanes. So really a historic airframe there. And then it wasn't before long, he was assigned to a new technology, the jet. And America's really first operational jet, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, another Kelly Johnson design, same with the gentleman who designed the P-38. The list can go on and on. The SR-71, I mean, just an amazing aircraft designer. This is our first jet. And you got to understand something about our first jets, just like our first rockets in the space program. We didn't always have the greatest amount of luck with some of these. Unfortunately, we lost some people in testing these aircraft. So they moved to California, out in the Burbank area, and they had just gotten their new apartment. And it was an apartment or a townhouse, I can't remember, but it was one of the two. And Marge was at home. Dick was supposed to, I believe, go golfing. Somehow he had ended up running by the base, and they asked if he wanted to hop a flight. I think somebody couldn't make the flight, and he said, sure, I'll take this one. So he took someone else's spot flying that day, and on takeoff, the airplane quit flying. Observers in the area said they saw several black puffs of smoke coming from the engine. Nobody really, there was an investigation as to what caused this loss of power, and they don't know, but he lost power on takeoff, and unfortunately lost his life in the crash of the airplane. He had a chance to bail out. The airplane was in a populated area, and he didn't want to do that. He stayed with it until he was too low. He tried to bail out, and just same thing as with Tommy Lynch, couldn't get out in time. What a lot of the experts point back to was something called an I-16 fuel pump. It was kind of an add-on to the airplane. It wasn't necessarily stock. Some P-80s had it, some didn't. On a previous flight, he'd mentioned to some pilots that he had forgotten to turn on that fuel pump. It's a possibility, and there were some of the family who disagree with that, and I certainly want to be respectful of the family and of the aircraft designer. So it's a lot of folks feel it was the I-16 pump, and a lot of folks know that it couldn't have been something that simple. So unfortunately, this event happened, period. I mean, it was a tragic day in American history. Why a lot of people don't know about it, this was the same day that we dropped the atomic bomb, August 6, 1945. So all of the front pages, if you go and Google front pages of the day we dropped the atomic bomb, I guarantee you at least a large portion of them, you'll see the headline, atomic bomb dropped on Japan. And then somewhere else on that front page, it'll say jet crash kills Major Bong. But of course, when we look back in history, we think of the large global event that happened that day. His body was sent eventually to Superior area, where they were had a funeral. That's Marge and some dignitaries and some family there, actually, at the service. Marge, she never really fully recovered from that, and I mean this in a manner that, she did. She ended up getting remarried to a husband about a year and a half later, and that didn't work out. She ended up getting married to another gentleman who that did work out for a long period of time, and he passed away. But in the back of her head and her mind, she always had this part of her life happened, and that Dick was certainly very special to her. For a long time, she kind of withdrew from doing public events, withdrew from really, wanting to be associated with it, and didn't really want to talk about it. And her daughters urged them, even in the Bong family as well. The Bong family always told Marge that she was one of them, regardless of anything. And they were naming the bridge up in Superior after him. And the family in the area finally, told Marge, like, you really should come out and be a part of this. And that wasn't finally enough that she did. And her daughters had urged her to go do it. She said the deciding factor was that one day they were in a toy store with her grandson, and her grandson came up with the model of that P-38 and said, look, Grandma, it's the same picture you have in your house. And it was the picture of her on the nose of the model. And so she eventually did come out. She started doing appearances. She actually came to EAA and would sign autographs. And she started raising money for a veterans center in the Poplar area. It's actually over in Superior, almost near Duluth. And they wanted to name it the Bong Veterans Center and make the entire museum about Richard Bong. And she said no, only because Richard wouldn't have liked that. That's not the kind of guy he was. She said, you can name it the Bong History Center, but it really should honor all veterans of all wars, because that he would want to share that. He'd be kind of embarrassed about it just being about him. So that's exactly what they did. First time I ever came to Oshkosh, that's the most memorable thing that happened to me in that Oshkosh that year, was getting to meet Marge, and it's something I'm very grateful for. I have a signed photo from her here in the office. So just an amazing story, an amazing lady, and just like Dick, she was just very, very eloquent, just a very lovely person. A few years ago, we wanted to do something to honor Richard Bong. We have of course, our 38 painted like it. So we reached out to the family, and dumb luck, the family was having a wedding in the area, and they were going to have like a mini family reunion, and we were the home of that family reunion. We had 40 members of Richard Bong's family here. I'm very honored to say that I've gotten to become friends with a large portion of them, and just a really great group of people. What's amazing to me is I guess it'd be his great nieces here look a lot like him in the eyes, I think. You can kind of see the family resemblance. This is his sister on the floor, and she was, I believe, like 95 at that point. And so we get this ladder up, and we're going to get them a chance to sit in the P-38. And very first person we had go up would have been his great nephew, I believe, who later became an Air Force F-15 Eagle pilot. When he graduated West Point, or I'm sorry, Air Force Academy, sorry about that. When he graduated the Air Force Academy, they actually pinned a set of Dick's wings onto him. Talk about an honor, right? So Jeff's going to go up first. So Jeff, he's the fighter pilot. He makes this look extremely easy. That's him right there. And he just kind of goes right up the ladder into the airplane like a fighter pilot would. Makes it look super cool. It's not really easy getting into a P-38, by the way, and this is all polished, so it's a little slippery up there. So we get so Jerry, his sister, says, well, I want to go up. And everybody's like, okay, how, especially on the museum team, I know you guys do this. And we're like, oh boy, we got to be really careful, because that's a pretty decent ladder up there. So it's a little bit of a high, ladder, and we're gonna have a woman in her 90s climb up here and get up in there. While we were figuring it out, we're like, well, what if one of us goes up first and helps her up, and another one behind in case she falls? We just hear somebody go, oh my God, Grandma. And she literally just walked right up the ladder, got up onto the wing, and climbed into the cockpit, like totally tired of us trying to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to get her in there. And she's like, I know what I'm doing. And she even pulled the canopy closed on her. And I was like, God, if we could have fired it up, she would have been ready to rock and roll. So just an amazing woman. The other special moment, and another museum I want to make sure we talk about, is that Bong History Center. It's a Bong Veterans Heritage Center. up in Superior, Poplar area. I think it's technically Superior, but they also have a P-38 that they have restored in his markings, and that P-38 has a special meaning as well. When he was killed after the war, they actually took a P-38 that was still in the boneyard, set and flew it to Wisconsin, and they put it on a pole outside of the school for a long time. So it sat outside for many years, and then the Air National Guard out in Minneapolis took it and restored it. And then at the same time, they were building this new museum, and it was placed in there. So that is a great museum as well to go to. You got to definitely go up there and see them. Now, I'm going to circle back to wrap this all in of why is that sign on 41 that says Bong Recreation Center? What on earth is that? And what that was originally going to be Bong Air Force Base. The Air Force wanted to put a base there. They actually went in, bought the land. They actually carved and plowed the runways, taxiways, connectors, all of that in. And then the Air Force changed their strategic view and decided they didn't need to put a fighter unit there anymore. So they just abandoned the whole project. So in the fall, or right about now, maybe a couple weeks from now, if you fly over that area, you could still see where the runway, taxiways, and everything were all carved into the land side. Without anything to do with it, the government gave it back basically to the state, and the state made a game for a nature preserve out there. So you can go out there and ride bikes and hunt, and well, I don't know if you can hunt, you can fish. I think there is a shooting range and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff you can go out and enjoy, but that's what that is. So, and a lot of folks have no idea. They just drive by that every day, kind of snicker at a name, not realizing what a hero that this truly is. I really think Hollywood's missing the boat by not doing a movie on Richard Bong. You have everything you need, built in there, between a love story, actual combat, a real love story, by the way, not some sort of made up thing, and just a really cool history lesson. But I know we want to have some questions and things here, so let me turn it over to Keegan, and I will try to entertain questions. And if I don't know the answer, I will try and make it up for you.
Thanks, Chris. We really appreciate it. Thanks for taking us on the tour of his experiences, but also showcasing some of what exists now in Wisconsin that helps sort of pay tribute to his memory. We definitely do have some questions coming in, but Chris, I think a big one that we would all be curious about is you've talked to some of his peers and you've talked to his contemporaries as well in the sort of in the Army Air Forces in the sort of immediate post-war era. Where would Bong have ended up had he not been killed? Have you got a theory, or is there a consensus among family members and fellow pilots?
Well, it's very interesting you say that. There's a lot of folks. Sometimes folks, want to say that maybe he wouldn't have gotten anywhere. There's some folks don't like when another pilot maybe gets a little famous and have some issues with that, and I can kind of see that because we make a big deal about Richard Bong, but we don't talk about Tom Lynch or someone like that. So I get that. I talked to some of his contemporaries who thought he would have gone pretty high in the Air Force. The most shocking one that I got was someone who said, I feel that he would have been selected as one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. And some folks can scoff that. And if you'd like, you can tell Frank Borman himself that he's wrong, because that's he told me. So he said, and Frank was a P-80 commander as well, and said, he checked all the boxes for the Air Force. He's a college graduate. He was married, fit the profile, was a humble guy. He was a team player. I think he would have been at least in the running to be one of those 7, which would have been really interesting to see how that would have played out.
Chris, I think one of the kind of interesting curiosities, if you read the Wikipedia page or read the various books that have been published about Bong, is to find out that one of his instructors was Barry Goldwater. Have you got anything more you can share about that story?
Yeah, actually, Barry Goldwater had it. Let me back up here. So I'm sorry you're reading this backwards. But there's a great quote on Barry Goldwater, who basically said that he was one of the best pilots he'd ever seen. Really natural on the controls. I'm sorry that we're going backwards, but it'll make sense. There you go. This was his quote. He was a very bright gunnery student. The most important thing came from a 38 Czech pilot who said that he was the finest natural pilot he'd ever met. There was no way he could keep Bong from getting on his tail, even though Bong was flying an AT-6, which was not a fast airplane by any means, and this gentleman was in a fighter. And that was from Barry Goldwater out in Luke Air Force Base. So yeah, I mean, it was some people just know how to fly an airplane, and that was certainly Bong.
And another question for you here, Chris. Did McGuire and Bong know each other? Obviously, there was some hurt feelings about being grounded so that Bong's, War Bonds tour wouldn't be impacted. Did they know each other? Did this transfer over into their personal relationship, or how were they able to handle it as pilots, both kind of wrestling against the apparatus of government?
Well, so they actually did know each other. There's actually some photos of them together. They met on several occasions, and I think it was probably a good spirited sort of like, we're going to go for this record kind of feel, almost like you would with a sporting event. Um, and I don't think there was any feeling toward Bong from McGuire until the grounding, and I still don't think it was necessarily toward Bong. McGuire wasn't happy with the situation being grounded. But and a touch on McGuire never did hit that 40 kills. McGuire has sat at 38 after Bong did his stateside arrival and a little bit of a touring, do some speeches and Warbond tour stuff. McGuire was released. On the very next mission, McGuire was killed in combat. So he never got another kill. Bong will always sit at 40, and McGuire will always sit at 38. By American standards, you go to different countries, of course, they have a lot more kills, especially if you go to like Germany or something. But America, 40, I think we're going to be hard pressed, hopefully, to ever hit a pilot that has 40 kills again. I hope we never see a conflict like that. But I think that's a record that's probably going to stand, especially with stuff like the UAVs and things coming online. I don't think you're going to see as many manned aircraft fighting other manned aircraft like we did before.
Chris, can you talk a little bit more about Bong's pre-war experiences? Was he flight trained as part of the civilian pilot training program or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. He was actually part of the civilian pilot training program. He did take some lessons with a local pilot in the Poplar area. And it's interesting because the runway, it was like a grass runway, and the grass runway still exists. And then he went over to the airport itself, the Poplar Airport, and the hangar that he would actually learn to fly in is still there when he was part of the civilian pilot training program. And as a matter of fact, there's a big mural and stuff in the terminal for him, and that original 1940s hangar is still there. So if you're a Bong fan, really you owe it to yourself to take that trip up to Poplar, stop here, obviously, and go up to Poplar. See, you can actually visit his burial site, and Marge is there as well. And then go to where he did his flight training. Go to the museum up there. It's really a neat place to visit if you're at all interested in his history.
Was there ever an interest or consideration given to upgrading from the P-38 to emergent types like the P-51? Do you think that would have changed the dynamic over there in the Pacific, or was the P-38 really the right airplane for the job?
Well, I think it's hard because the P-51 is such an icon of World War II. The thing that these guys loved about their P-38s was in the Pacific, you were flying over some really hostile territory. And I don't necessarily mean just from enemy fighters, but you're over a lot of water for a long period of time. Some of these islands are just uninhabited. you really didn't want to go down, even if it was just because of faulty engine. And that's why they loved their P-38 so much, the firepower that was there. They did actually experiment with switching to P-47s. And so Richard Kirkland was one of those guys. He did switch. He lost his early 38, and transitioned into the Thunderbolt. And then and the Thunderbolt's an amazing airplane. I mean, it's one of my favorites. But the guys, they didn't like it. They didn't like it as much as the 38. Kirkland said it was really heavy. It was a heavy airplane. You only had one engine, which they didn't like. He said, of course, it was a lot of armor, and that was great. And it wasn't very long before they switched back into the 38s. Now, I don't know if we lost one of their combat leaders, Neil Kirby, in a 47, and I don't know if that was the inspiration for them switching from the 47 to the 38, but it happened very shortly after that event. They went right back into P-38s again. Hope that helps.
I think that it does. Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about the islands where they were stationed and perhaps the campaigns they were involved with in the Pacific while Bong was accruing this incredible total of enemy kills?
Yeah, so they were in like the Southwest Pacific and New Guinea area specifically. As a matter of fact, everybody always wants to know, is our aircraft the one we have here? And I'm sure that if anybody's listening from the Bong Museum up north, they get that same question: is our aircraft the real Marge? And the answer is no. Neither one of our aircraft is the real one. Our airplanes are painted to represent it. The real Marge, Dick went home on leave. Somebody took Marge out for a maintenance flight. The airplane caught on fire and actually crashed in a small town in New Guinea. And the pilot got out. He survived. But yeah, it was all around the New Guinea, and you're talking about campaigns. Some of these islands, it was interesting because I was researching it for this, and some of these islands today are still not even that populated. So, but basically around the New Guinea area is where they were. They moved around a lot of little island bases, things like that.
This may be another question that comes up fairly routinely when you're standing under the nose of a P-38, but did Bong or his unit have any involvement in the attack on Yamamoto?
So Bong's group did not, but that was a group of P-38 pilots that they went out and got him. That was a different group, but same type of airplane. They intercepted the code that they found out Yamamoto was going to be being transported. They intercepted the two Bettys and shot them down. Oddly enough, I believe the Betty that crashed, where Yamamoto was, is still it's a memorial like out where it fell. You can actually go out and visit it. But so yeah, same type of airplane, similar base, similar group, but just different group of guys. There is a great story of Bong saving a B-25 crew. He was on his way back. He had already had a successful day, was turning back and discovered a B-25 being attacked by an airplane, and he was able to swing back, and with a single shot from his cannon, he actually blew the tail off the Japanese airplane. So again, we talked about weaponry on the P-38. It was pretty massive.
Well, Chris, that's going to draw us close to the end of tonight's presentation, but I think because we've got a group of new folks here who haven't been with us since the early days of the webinar program, it'd probably be appropriate for us to ask you, Chris, you've got a book that's just out. Can you tell us a little bit more about the book that came out earlier this year, and also where we might find it and how we might support the EAA Museum and its continued efforts to catalog veteran stories and connect them with these incredible airplanes?
Well, I really appreciate that. Thanks. I wrote a book. Myself and Hal together, Brian here, put together a book called The Final Mission. And if you go onto eaa.org/final mission, or if you just Google EAA B-17 Final Mission book, it'll come up. And what it is there's a lot of knowledgeable people out there that can write a book about the B-17. And I guess I would not even want to battle wits with some of those folks. However, and I know when I met Keegan, I was in this role. I was in a unique role where I was arranging media flights for our B-17 aluminum overcast as it toured the country. And I was able to find World War II vets and put them back on the airplane one more time. And I know I'm talking, to a group of people that are interested in this. You all know as well as anybody else that when you get these veterans back near their aircraft, whether it's World War II, Korea, Vietnam, you get them near the airplane that they're associated with, the stories just come out. The aircraft become a catalyst for the conversation. And we heard some really amazing stories. And these guys would come out and they would share their private photo albums with us. Never before published or seen photos outside of their photo album. So we got permission to put this book together, to share their stories, their photos, some great photos of our airplane, and just kind of give you an idea of why it's important to preserve these aircraft. It's because we're very fast approaching a time where we're not going to have our World War II vets here to tell us these stories. Preserving these aircraft and making sure they're in museums or they're flying, it's so vitally important because it's going to be up to us for the first time in history to be the core storytellers of the World War II generation. And that's what this book is. It's a slice of what just one airplane was able to evoke, the stories that were easily able to come out. And I'm really proud of it. It was probably the thing that I'm most proud of working in my aviation career, is just getting these vets up to go flying one more time. You get them out near the airplane. They're well, the youngest I think they could be at this point is about 90, 91. And you get them up near the airplane and they become kind of youthful again. You might see a cane leaning on a tire or something, that they're sort of walking a bit more upright, or they're sharing stories that nobody's heard before. And that can be any airplane. You get the right person, and you're going to hear those stories. And it's not just them. And that's something else I'm proud of. It's stories of their families that came out and said, I never knew what Grandpa did. I never knew what this experience was like, and I went flying with you guys, and this was just overwhelming and very emotional. And now we're starting to see it with Vietnam folks. We just got a Huey in our museum a couple months ago, and we're really getting some amazing and powerful stories from Vietnam as well. So I encourage you, if you're not part of any aviation museum, wherever you are in the country, go find that local air museum, go find that local warbird on a pole somewhere and help. Do whatever you can to be part of it. I can tell you now, organizations need to help more than ever before, not just because of the COVID stuff. We need help. We need people to get into this, because we need to make sure that we get other people excited about it and we keep this going. So it's the job that these World War II veterans had. Was just, we've never asked anybody to do anything like that before, to save the world, basically. So it's kind of up to us to make sure, the least we could do is make sure their stories aren't forgotten.
Chris, I think you've hit exactly the right note with your closing remarks there. We all share that responsibility as people who are involved with museums as well as vintage military aircraft. I think we all understand that we have a responsibility to that generation to help share their stories and make sure that the lessons that they can teach us about what we can accomplish as a country that's united, and what we can do when we rise to the challenge posed by adversity. Those are all points as salient today as they were then, and we owe it to that generation to continue that legacy and to continue sharing those stories and those lessons. So.
Absolutely. And and something I'm proud of is I also am one of the people that works on our Timeless Voices oral history program here. And I can guarantee you, if there's a vet, and it's something I even stress in the book, and please, if there's a neighbor that or somebody that served, or just you think has a cool story and are willing to share that story, take a few minutes and talk to them, because they may very well be willing to just want to share it, but they don't know who to talk to about it and how to do it. So what's more important than anything is getting that story captured, and that's kind of what we learned with our oral history program here. So please go out and talk to your vets, and and see if they're willing to share it, and if they are, sit down and talk with them. Even record it if you can, and if you can't, still sit there and just take it all in. And they probably need that.
It can be challenging in times like today when assisted living facilities and so on are walled off, but veterans need that point of human contact perhaps now more than they ever have. There are ways to do it. There are ways to still connect and communicate with veterans even while observing pandemic precautions. There are members of our own team right now. Mike Potter, one of our museum volunteers, is working to gather an oral history. He was actually working on it today. It has relevance to our original World War II control tower here on site. We've actually, Mike has managed to locate someone who was inside that tower back at RAF Gox Hill during the war as an American airman. So there are ways you are able to work with the assisted living facilities and so on to observe their precautions. But yes, capturing these stories is as important now as it ever has been, perhaps more so. So Chris, we want to thank you for being here with us this evening. Folks, if you're curious about Chris's other presentation, B-17 Final Mission, it's available on our webinar archive. You can find that by visiting militaryaviationmuseum.org/webinar-archive. You can enjoy that whole presentation. It was absolutely fantastic, and it was several months back. So have a great rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll see you all out at the museum soon. Chris, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. The honor was mine. Thanks for having me.
Anytime.